I never believed a single sentence could erase a lifetime, yet mine did on a cold December evening. It happened so quietly that even the wind paused against my coat. If you have ever felt replaced by people you raised with love, you may understand what I faced that night. Before we begin, you are welcome here. If stories about dignity, quiet strength, and second chances speak to you, feel free to subscribe and tell me which city you are listening from. Now let me take you to the moment one sentence pushed me out of Christmas. My name is Margaret Hayes. I am 72 years old. I am a retired auditor who still trusts numbers more than promises. On the night everything shifted, I stood on my son's porch with a tin of ginger cookies wrapped in ribbon. The wind pushed against my coat. Thin ice crackled under my shoes. Inside the house, warm light floated across the curtains. I heard laughter. I heard movement. I did not hear footsteps coming toward me. I rang the doorbell again. The chime echoed through the hallway. Someone approached. The lock clicked once. Then the door opened only a few inches, just enough for my son to slip into the frame. Richard did not smile. He held the door like a shield rather than a welcome. Behind him, the golden glow of his living room flickered like a world I no longer belonged to. "Mom, you are not part of Christmas this year." His voice was flat, firm, final. The sentence struck with a force no winter wind could equal. My breath tightened inside my chest. I stood still, holding that tin of cookies as if it carried the weight of my entire place in the family. I studied his face. He avoided my eyes. His jaw clenched. His hand tightened on the door. These small signs were enough for an auditor like me. They told me the decision had been made long before I knocked. Then she appeared behind him. Carla, my daughter-in-law, arms crossed, chin tilted with a victory she did not bother to hide. Her eyes slid over me like I was a stranger who had arrived at the wrong address. She stepped close enough for her perfume to reach me. A cold floral scent cut through the warm air inside the house. "It is better this way." She said the words softly, but soft did not mean kind. She placed a hand on Richard's arm. Her gesture looked gentle. It carried power, a quiet command disguised as support. "Better for who, dear?" I asked. My voice remained calm. Years of auditing had taught me control, even when the truth hurt, even when numbers revealed betrayal. Richard's shoulders slumped. Carla answered for him. "My family has delicate traditions. Christmas dinner will be formal. You know how you get overwhelmed at these things." Her tone held no respect, only condescension. She continued, "The menu is refined. The guests are selective. It is best to keep the environment balanced." Environment, balanced, selective. These were just polished words for exclusion. I stepped back slightly. The cold settled deeper into my bones, yet my voice stayed steady. "So you are removing me from Christmas to protect the environment." Carla nodded as if she had solved a complex equation. Richard still avoided my gaze. No one in that house remembered the nights I worked double shifts to support Richard. No one remembered the years I saved every spare dollar from auditing jobs so he could attend college without debt. No one remembered the woman who had held their newborn son while Carla slept without worry. Carla reached for the door. Her fingers brushed the wood. The message was clear. It was time for me to leave. That was when I felt something press gently against my palm inside my coat pocket. A small metal curve. The old house key I had carried for years. A key to a place they believed no longer existed. A key to a part of me they thought had vanished. The wind lifted again. It rustled the hem of my coat. The porch light flickered. I stood still. I felt the moment carve a scar inside me. Something quiet cracked. Not loud enough for them to notice. Loud enough for me to hear. Richard finally met my eyes. His gaze wavered. Perhaps he expected tears. Perhaps he expected pleading. Instead, I offered him a small nod, one that carried the weight of 72 years, one that said I understood exactly what this decision meant. "Enjoy your evening, sweetheart," I said. My voice was steady. He blinked, bracing for a curse or a cry. Instead, I gave him a curt nod. Carla exhaled sharply, the sound of victory. The door closed. The lock turned. The warm light disappeared. I stood alone on the porch with the tin of cookies in my hands and a lifetime behind me. I walked down the steps slowly, the key in my pocket pressed against my palm again. Its familiar weight steadied me. As the wind curled around my coat, something inside me shifted. Not broken, not defeated, something rising, something steady, something long overdue. At the bottom of the steps, I paused and looked back at the house. Through the window, I saw the silhouettes of guests, the clink of glasses, the soft shimmer of a tree decorated with silver ornaments. A scene filled with warmth, yet the warmth did not belong to me. I turned away. My steps were slow but firm. My breath left small clouds in the night. I reached my car. Before starting the engine, I opened the tin of cookies. The ginger scent drifted into the cold air. They had been baked for a celebration. Instead, they marked the beginning of something else. Rejection can erase a seat at the table. It cannot erase the truth. It cannot erase who I am. It cannot erase the doors still waiting to open. I placed the cookies on the passenger seat, tightened my grip on the wheel, and drove into the dark. As streetlights passed overhead, the key pressed once more against my palm with steady purpose. They had no idea what that key meant. They had no idea what door it could open. He had no idea what door that key could open. When I reached home that night, the house felt larger than usual. Empty rooms echoed every sound of my steps. I placed the tin of cookies on the counter and removed my gloves. The silence was too clean, too sharp, like the pause between two heartbeats. I turned on the lamp beside Arthur's old armchair. Its yellow light softened the corners of the room. My reflection in the window looked older than I remembered. 72, widow for 15 years, a mother of one, and apparently no longer part of Christmas. As I hung my coat, the key in my pocket slipped against my fingers again. The metal was cool, heavy with meaning. It belonged to Arthur's private safe, the same safe he had sealed before he died. That night, the memory returned like a tide I could not hold back. 15 years earlier, I stood beside that same chair while Arthur packed his ledgers into a leather case. The morning light fell across his silver hair. Even then, he looked like a man made of calm precision. Arthur Hayes, former auditor turned investor, always measured, always composed. He had been quiet all week. Then, as he locked the case, he looked at me with eyes that carried both love and warning. One day he said, "Let Richard show you who he truly is. Then give him what he earns." I frowned. "What do you mean?" Arthur smiled faintly. "You'll understand when it matters. Keep the key safe. And when the time comes, open the box together with your heart, not your fear." His words confused me. Back then, Richard was 25, ambitious but kind. He still visited every Sunday, still called me Mom with warmth. Carla had just entered his life charming, polished, full of ideas about refinement. I saw how her influence shaped him little by little. His laugh became shorter, his eyes more distant. He started counting appearances instead of blessings. A month before Arthur passed, he sealed an envelope and placed it in the safe along with the key. "This is my last test," he said. "Not for him, for you." He passed away 3 weeks later. Heart failure. Quiet. Dignified. I never opened the safe. I told myself it was too soon. I told myself I already knew what was inside his will, maybe a few financial notes, perhaps a final love letter. The truth was, I was afraid that opening it would mean accepting that he was truly gone. Now, 15 years later, I sat before that same safe once more. The metal was cold under my hand. My pulse followed the rhythm of the rain outside. I turned the key. The mechanism clicked softly. Inside, 2 things waited: a sealed letter with my name written in Arthur's handwriting and a smaller box wrapped in faded blue paper. I took the letter first. The paper had yellowed at the edges. The seal remained unbroken. My fingers trembled slightly as I tore it open. "My dearest Margaret," it began. "If you are reading this, I am gone. Do not cry long for me. I lived exactly as I wanted with you by my side. What I leave behind is not just wealth, but a choice. Within this safe, you will find 2 keys. One is for the ocean estate in Maine. The other opens a trust I built quietly over the years. Its value will surprise you. I hid it not from greed, but to protect what we built from those who may one day forget the meaning of work and gratitude. I paused. My chest tightened. Do not decide anything now, the letter continued. Time will reveal the truth about our son. When it does, remember my words. Let Richard show you who he truly is. Then give him what he earns. That is how you will know peace. Arthur's signature flowed across the bottom of the page. Simple. Confident. I held the letter close to my chest, the scent of old ink mixed with salt from my tears. The small box inside the safe contained 2 keys exactly as he had said, one marked estate, the other trust. I lifted them both, feeling their weight press into my palm. I thought of the nights Arthur and I worked late, auditing companies together at our kitchen table, counting figures, building a quiet life that was never loud but always honest. He had mentioned the Ocean Estate once briefly as a dream project, a place he had bought under a corporate name to keep it private. I had assumed it was sold long ago. Apparently, I was wrong. A $7 million property, a trust of greater value, and a son who now considered me a burden. For a long while, I sat motionless. Outside, the wind brushed against the window pane. Inside, the clock ticked toward midnight. I remembered the last Christmas with Arthur. Richard had been home that year, bright and proud with new ambitions. He had talked endlessly about luxury, about climbing higher. Arthur listened quietly, then turned to me later and said, "He's learning the language of status, not of worth." I did not want to believe him. I defended Richard, saying he was young, eager to succeed. Arthur only nodded. "Eagerness is good," he said. "Entitlement is not." Those words returned now as sharp as the day he spoke them. I unfolded the trust documents that lay beneath the letter. Arthur's handwriting filled the margins with notes. The trust was structured meticulously: ownership clauses, performance conditions, contingent transfers. It was unmistakably his way of testing both of us. At the bottom of the page, a final line stood alone. "When love forgets its roots, justice must remember." The sentence hit deeper than I expected. It was not bitterness, it was balance, the same principle he had lived by. I placed the papers back into the safe, careful, deliberate. My reflection in the metal door looked steadier than before. The hurt from that night at Richard's door was still fresh, but now it sat beside something else, purpose. Arthur had always believed that truth surfaces through conduct, not confession. And now his final design had begun to unfold. I closed the safe, locked it, and sat back in the chair. The key rested on my lap, gleaming faintly in the lamplight. My tears came quietly warm against my skin. They were not tears of weakness. They were tears of understanding. Arthur had never left me without guidance. He had left me a path. As the clock struck 12, I whispered into the quiet room, "You always knew, didn't you, Arthur? You knew this day would come." I pressed the letter to my chest and closed my eyes. The scent of the old paper lingered like his cologne. The house was still, the night patient. The test had begun. I opened Arthur's letter, and for the first time in years, I cried not from pain, but from understanding. I sat in my old chair and let the memories drift in. They did not rush. They came softly, layer by layer, the way a slow exile begins long before anyone says the word exile. The cutting off does not happen in one blow. It comes in small slices that look harmless at first. A comment, a look, a door that stays half closed instead of open. The first slice happened 2 years after Arthur died. Gabriel was 6 then. He saw me step into the house with a new puzzle set for him. His face lit up. He ran toward me with open arms. I bent down, ready to catch him, ready to feel the warmth that only a child can give. Before he reached me, Carla snapped her fingers. "Stand still, please. We do not run into people like that. Not grandmother, not family, not love, just a category beneath her standards." Gabriel froze, confused. His arms stayed half raised, his smile dissolved. I knelt and opened my arms anyway. He looked at his mother first. Her head moved a single inch, a tiny shake, a sharp message. Gabriel lowered his arms. He stepped back. He whispered hello with his eyes on the floor. The puzzle box felt heavier in my hand, not because of weight, but because of what it represented. One more piece of me pushed aside. Another slice came during the themed dinner nights. Carla hosted them every quarter. Italian night, French night, garden chic night. She said they required perfect visuals, perfect outfits, perfect guests. I was invited to the first two out of courtesy. By the third, the invitation did not come. When I asked Richard if I should bring dessert, he lowered his voice and said they wanted a uniform aesthetic. The word aesthetic cut deeper than he knew. I had spent 20 years bringing desserts to his school events, to his friends, to every holiday. Suddenly, my presence was not aesthetic enough. I thanked him softly and hung up. The silence that followed carved a line inside me. Then came the photos. I visited one afternoon to drop off some tax forms Richard needed. When I walked into the living room, something felt off. The walls looked bare, cleaner, too clean. The picture of me holding Richard on his first day of college was gone. The frame from our family trip to Savannah was missing. The portrait Arthur took of me in the garden had vanished. Every trace of my face had been removed with careful hands. Carla walked in holding a stack of neutral frames. She said she wanted a cohesive look for the home. She said it with a smile, the kind of smile that hides a blade. I nodded, but inside another seam tore open. A house can feel like a museum when the curator decides which history is allowed to exist. The harshest slice came a month later. Gabriel came home from school and handed me a drawing he made. It was a family portrait, his house in the background, Carla on one side, Richard on the other, and me in the middle holding his hand. I felt tears rise soft but deep. I hugged him gently. He leaned into me, warm and proud. That evening, I placed the drawing on the counter to let it dry. When I returned, it was gone. I found Carla standing near the trash bin. The drawing was torn in half. The rip was clean and decisive. She said the proportions were off. She said children need guidance on presentation. She said the drawing did not match the tone of the home. I picked up the torn halves. Gabriel watched from the hallway. His lower lip trembled. He said nothing. Children often say nothing when they are learning where power sits. That moment showed him more about power than any lesson he would hear at school. Richard walked in later. I held the torn drawing in my hands. He glanced at it and sighed. He said we should not make a big deal out of small accidents. Small accidents. The phrase echoed through me. He believed Carla. Or he wanted peace with Carla more than truth with me. Peace built on my erasure was not peace. It was surrender. That night, I sat in my car before driving home. I held the two halves of the drawing together. The tear line was jagged, but the picture made sense again once the pieces touched. The drawing felt like a mirror. A reflection of my family held together only when I forced the fragments into place. I kept silent through all of it. My silence was not weakness. It had memory. It remembered every moment I stepped aside to let Richard grow. It remembered every hour I worked to keep his future stable. It remembered the nights Arthur and I planned the trust for a son we believed would stay grounded. My silence held all of that. It waited. Silence with memory is different from silence with fear. Mine began shifting after Arthur's letter. His handwriting stayed with me. He had trusted my judgment. He had trusted my strength. He had trusted that I would know when a line had been crossed. The line was drawn the night they barred me from Christmas, but the years before had prepared the ground. Exile is slow until it is not. One day you realize the door you knock on is no longer yours to open. One day you realize home is not a place, but the truth you carry. 3 days after Christmas, I returned to Richard's home, not to ask for anything, not to wait for an apology. I came to collect the last of my belongings, a sweater, a few books, a teacup Arthur gave me. Carla watched with crossed arms. Richard stood beside her. They thought I had come to mend things. I did not mend anything. I packed in silence. I moved carefully. Carla pretended not to notice when I took the torn drawing from behind a stack of boxes. She thought I had forgotten it. She was wrong. I placed the halves in my folder. They were part of my story now. When I reached the door, Richard asked if I wanted to stay for dinner. The question came too late. An invitation means nothing after removal. I thanked him and stepped into the cold air. The wind stung my face, but the sting felt clean, honest. I walked to my car without looking back. My hand touched the old key in my pocket. The metal felt steady. It reminded me that some doors are closed by others, but the door that matters is one you open yourself. That night, I made my decision. I chose to leave their world without waiting for a single apology. My footsteps were slow, but each one carried the weight of freedom. The quiet exile was over. I would not return as a woman who asked for a place. I would return as a woman who owned her worth. I kept the old key in my coat pocket through the winter. It rested against my palm whenever I reached for comfort. The metal felt cold but steady. That night, after leaving Richard's house for the last time, I sat by the window of my own home, the silence so deep it hummed. I looked at the small safe in the corner. It had been untouched for years. The key in my coat seemed to pulse with memory. Arthur had once said the day would come when I would need to open it again. At the time, I had laughed. I had thought we were done with secrets. Now the quiet told me otherwise. I took the key from my pocket and turned it in my hand. The grooves were worn smooth from years of carrying it without purpose. The lock on the safe looked almost shy beneath the thin layer of dust. My fingers trembled as I pressed the key inside. The mechanism clicked. A heavy, satisfying sound like a bone snapping back into place. Inside lay 3 items: a velvet pouch, a thick envelope, and a stack of papers bound in twilight blue ribbon. I traced its edges with my thumb. Then I unfolded the papers. They were trust documents signed 15 years ago, notarized in Charleston. Arthur's handwriting filled the margins with precise notes, the kind only an accountant or a man who loved order could write. The envelope was last. Its seal had cracked slightly with age. I broke it the rest of the way. Inside was a single sheet of thick ivory paper. Arthur's handwriting ran across it, steady and deliberate. One day let Richard show you who he truly is. Then give him what he earns. This home will reveal the truth. I read the line twice, then a third time. His words carried no anger, only foresight. Arthur had always been patient, almost too patient. He believed in merit more than in inheritance. He built his wealth quietly, piece by piece, and never used it to command respect. The world saw him as a modest businessman, someone comfortable but ordinary. Only I knew the depth of what he left behind. When he passed, I protected it not from strangers, but from our own son's vanity. Arthur had once trusted Richard to learn humility. I had trusted Carla to help him grow. We had both been wrong. I looked again at the trust documents. The numbers on them would make anyone's breath stop. An oceanfront estate valued at $7 million. A portfolio larger, still hidden behind layers of corporate structure. I had not touched it since Arthur's death. It was meant to stay silent until Richard proved worthy of its name. Now, after all these years, Arthur's test was complete. I folded the papers carefully, slid them back into the safe, and held the estate key in my hand. The metal caught the lamplight, glimmering like quiet defiance. My reflection shimmered faintly on its surface. For the first time in months, my shoulders straightened. Arthur had always said, legacy is not money. It is what you do when people think you have none. Those words returned now like a hand on my back, guiding me forward. I reached for the phone and called a number I had not dialed in years. The car service still recognized my name. A limousine, I said. Yes, tonight, pick up in 1 hour. The operator hesitated for a second, perhaps surprised by the calm in my voice. When I ended the call, I stood before the mirror. My hair had turned silver since the last time I saw that estate. My face had more lines, but they were not marks of age. They were proof of endurance. I changed into a dark coat, the one Arthur loved. Inside its lining, the smaller key still rested, the one Richard never noticed. The coat smelled faintly of cedar and winter air. It was the scent of memory, but also of clarity. Outside, the night carried a quiet hum. When the limousine pulled up, its headlights cut across the driveway like twin paths of light. The driver opened the door with polite precision. I nodded and stepped inside. The seat was soft, the warmth immediate. For a moment, I closed my eyes. This was not indulgence. It was restoration. As the car moved through the streets of Charleston, I watched the familiar buildings pass by. The bakery Arthur and I used to visit, the courthouse where we signed our first property deed, the park bench where he proposed awkwardly with trembling hands. Each place whispered a memory reminding me of the man who never flaunted wealth, but built safety for others. The road widened as we approached the coast. The air changed saltier, freer. My heart beat slower, heavier in rhythm with the wheels. The driver turned onto a private road lined with oak trees. Spanish moss hung like silver threads from the branches, swaying gently in the wind. We reached the gate just as the last light of evening touched the horizon. The estate loomed ahead, silent and golden under the setting sun. I stepped out of the car. The gravel crunched under my shoes. The gate was tall wrought iron and elegant. I took the large key from my coat. Its teeth gleamed. I slid it into the lock. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the gate groaned softly and opened wide as if recognizing its keeper. The sight beyond took my breath. The ocean stretched beyond the garden, endless and calm. The house itself rose in soft cream stone, its windows glowing like lanterns, catching the last rays of light. Every line of it spoke Arthur's taste, simple, strong, enduring. I walked through the gate slowly, my hand brushing the iron as I passed. The smell of salt and pine mixed with something faintly floral lavender, Arthur's favorite. My shoes left clean tracks on the gravel path like a signature of return. Inside, the doors opened easily. Dust floated in the golden air. The silence here was not empty. It was sacred. I stood in the center of the grand room and felt Arthur's presence everywhere in the order of the books, the curve of the staircase, the quiet dignity of the space. He had built this not to impress the world, but to protect truth. His truth. Our truth. I turned toward the window where the sea met the horizon and whispered softly, "You were right." The wind answered through the open door, carrying the scent of salt and sunlight. For the first time in years, I did not feel erased. I felt restored. The keys, the trust, the legacy, they were not revenge. They were balance. As the sun dipped below the water, the house glowed as if lit from within. The limousine waited by the gate, silent and ready. I smiled. My shoulders relaxed for the first time in years. Christmas would not be canceled. It would simply move to a place worthy of my husband's legacy. The first morning at the estate began in quiet gold. Light moved through the tall windows like water touching the walls Arthur once planned himself. I stood in the center of the grand hall, the key still in my pocket, the weight of purpose in my chest. The air smelled faintly of salt and polish. Arthur's portrait hung above the staircase. He looked both proud and patient, as if waiting for me to remember who I was. I called the caretaker listed in the trust papers, a man named Mr. Langford. He arrived within an hour, his truck carrying supplies and a notebook full of memories. When he stepped inside, his eyes widened. "Mrs. Hayes," he said softly, "we always kept the place aired, just as Mr. Arthur requested." Hearing my husband's name spoken aloud filled the air with something warm. I thanked him and asked if he could help restore the house to its former rhythm. He smiled. "Arthur told me you'd return when it was time." Together, we began the work. Sheets came off furniture like ghosts leaving a room. The chandeliers above us woke with the sound of glass catching light. The floors gleamed again under each sweep of the broom. The estate began to breathe. By noon, the kitchen smelled like lemon oil and possibility. I sat at the long dining table and opened my notebook. There were names written inside, people I had not seen in years. Old friends, cousins, neighbors, each of them had been pushed aside by Richard and Carla's selective invitations. I wrote at the top of the page, "Those worth remembering." I picked up the phone and started dialing. The first call was to Marjorie Bennett Arthur's sister, who lived in North Carolina. Her voice trembled when she heard mine. "Margaret, is that really you? I thought you disappeared after the funeral." "I'm back," I said, "and I'm hosting Christmas at Arthur's house." A long pause followed, then a cry that sounded like joy. "Arthur's house. The one by the ocean." "Yes," I answered, "the same one he built for the people who believed in love, not appearances." The next calls followed like a soft storm. Each voice carried disbelief that I was calling from an estate. Each one held a shared story of being excluded by Richard's polished manners and Carla's social filters. By the end of the afternoon, every line on my list had turned into a confirmed yes. Mr. Langford watched me make the final call. When I hung up, he said quietly, "Feels like the right people are finally coming home." I nodded. They are. The restoration moved faster after that. Florists from the nearby town arrived bringing winter lilies and white roses. The old groundskeeper lit the fountain again. A local baker, once a friend of Arthur's, offered to cater the dinner free of charge. "It's an honor," she said. Arthur helped my husband get his first loan. As the house filled with life, I walked through each room and remembered. The library smelled the same as it had when Arthur worked there late into the night. The piano still bore the scratch Gabriel made years ago during his first visit. I did not polish it away. Some marks are worth keeping. At sunset, I stepped into the grand hall once more. The chandeliers were lit. Every bulb cast a soft golden hue across the marble floor. That light became the estate's third motif, the golden hall light, a symbol of truth returning home. I stood beneath it and whispered, "Arthur, your home is awake again." While checking the mail that evening, I found a voicemail on my phone. The number was unfamiliar, but the voice was gentle and deliberate. "Mrs. Hayes, this is Ms. Turner, Gabriel's teacher. I hope this isn't an intrusion." Today, Gabriel cried in class. "He told me you wouldn't be at Christmas. He said Christmas doesn't work without Grandma. I just thought you should know." Her words broke through me like sunlight through frost. For the first time in weeks, I sat down and cried not from pain, but from the return of something real. Gabriel still remembered. The chain between us had bent but never broken. When my tears slowed, I called Ms. Turner back. She answered quickly, "Mrs. Hayes, I'm so sorry if that message overstepped." "Not at all," I said. "You gave me the truth, and truth is never out of place." I took a slow breath before continuing. "I'd like to invite you and Gabriel here on the 25th. This house was meant for family, not for pretenders, and right now you are the only adult I trust to bring him safely." There was silence on the line. Then her voice returned softer than before. "I'd be honored, Mrs. Hayes." When the call ended, I stood by the window overlooking the courtyard. The moon rose behind the pines, spilling light across the garden. I could almost see Arthur walking along the stone path, hands behind his back, studying the roses as he used to. The next morning, I worked with the staff to decorate the dining hall. We kept the table long polished and welcoming. No silver name cards, no rigid themes, just warmth and sincerity, the kind Arthur loved. Each chair represented someone once made to feel small. Now they would sit where they belonged. By afternoon, the florist returned with garlands of evergreen and candles for the mantel. The faint scent of pine mixed with the sea breeze entering through open windows. In that scent, I felt the past align with the present. Mr. Langford approached carrying a box of ornaments wrapped in tissue paper. "These were from the first Christmas here," he said. He handed me one shaped like a small compass. Arthur used to hang it on the highest branch himself. I placed it gently on the tree and smiled. "He always knew where home was," I whispered. As dusk fell, workers finished placing lanterns along the path to the main entrance. Their glow reflected against the ocean through the tall glass doors. The whole estate shimmered in gold and quiet promise. For the first time in years, I felt something settle into place. Dignity, peace, and direction. This was not revenge. It was correction. Arthur had built a sanctuary of truth, and I had finally stepped into it. I poured myself a small glass of sherry and walked out to the terrace. The sea below whispered against the rocks. Waves caught the last strands of daylight and carried them toward the horizon. I thought of the guests who would arrive soon, people who had once felt erased. Now they would witness the real legacy of the man they respected. I leaned on the railing, the golden light from the hall spilling out behind me. The house glowed like a heartbeat in the dark. It was alive again, honest, radiant, and ready. I lifted my glass toward the water. The breeze brushed my face, cool and familiar. "Arthur," I said softly, "the test begins tonight." By noon on December 25th, the ocean breeze had softened into something almost warm. The estate shimmered under pale sunlight. I stood at the top of the marble steps, watching cars wind slowly through the front gates. Each arrival felt like the heartbeat of a life returning. The first guest to step out was Marjorie Bennett Arthur's sister. Her cane clicked against the stone, but her eyes glowed brighter than I remembered. She looked around, speechless. "Margaret," she whispered, "I thought this place was gone." "Not gone," I said, "just waiting." Behind her came the Bennett's grown children, then neighbors, old business partners, and friends I had not seen since Arthur's funeral. They stepped through the golden hall light and stopped mid-stride, their faces tilting upward in awe. The chandeliers scattered sunbeams across the walls like living stars. The smell of pine and roasted apples floated from the dining room. Every arrival brought the same mixture of shock and tenderness. Some wept, some laughed through tears. One whispered Arthur would be proud of you. Mr. Langford and his team guided them toward the main hall. I watched them rediscover memories I thought time had stolen. The piano was playing again. The fireplace glowed. Children ran across the rugs that once belonged to my mother. The estate was alive, and I felt alive with it. I moved among them quietly, answering questions with a calm that surprised even me. "Yes," I said when asked. "Arthur built this before he passed. He left it in trust. No one knew because it was not meant for show. It was meant for truth." Soon laughter filled the rooms, but not the shallow laughter of pretension. It was the sound of people remembering who they were when life was still honest. Someone brought out an old photo album. The pictures of Arthur smiling by the ocean spread across the table, and everyone leaned in to see. Phones appeared. Cameras clicked. Videos recorded the chandeliers, the gardens, the long table set for 40 guests. And then came the post. On the Bennett family group chat, someone uploaded a photo of all of us standing beneath the golden light glasses raised in a toast. The caption read, "Christmas with those who still remember what family means." Within minutes, the image spread through family circles that had long since gone silent. Cousins forwarded it. Nieces shared it. Friends texted it to others who had once been turned away from Richard and Carla's events. By the time dessert reached the table, my phone buzzed. Then buzzed again, and again. 7 notifications in a row. I did not need to look to know who it was. Richard. Somewhere across town, he must have opened his phone and seen the picture. He would have recognized the chandelier, the piano, the sea in the background. He would have recognized me not as the quiet mother he dismissed, but as the woman standing where dignity belonged. I imagined the look on his face, the disbelief first, then the fear, then the dawning realization that every social layer Carla had built was cracking. At that very moment across the city, Carla sat in her designer living room preparing her own Christmas dinner for the select guests. Her table gleamed with imported crystal. Every candle was symmetrical, every plate identical. Yet when one of her friends gasped and turned the phone toward her, everything inside that room froze. On the screen, the estate glowed like gold reborn. The caption burned brighter than any ornament. "Christmas with those who still remember what family means." Carla's smile stiffened. Her wine glass trembled slightly. Someone tried to speak, but the room fell into the kind of silence that wealth cannot disguise. For a woman who built her worth on exclusivity, there is no cruelty greater than being excluded from truth. Richard's voice cut through the silence. "Where did she get that house?" No one answered. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping across the floor. He grabbed his phone and called me. The first call came as I lifted a tray of cinnamon pastries from the oven. The second as I poured tea for Marjorie. The third while children sang in the next room. Each vibration felt distant, irrelevant. I let them ring. Around me, conversations bloomed. People asked for stories about Arthur, how he built his company, how he met me, how he always believed wealth was a mirror, not a weapon. I told them the truth that the house was never about power, but about worth. Someone raised a glass. To Arthur, they said. Glasses lifted all around. The sound of crystal touching crystal echoed like gentle thunder. Then Ms. Turner Gabriel's teacher arrived with the boy. His small hand clutched hers until he saw me. He broke into a run. This time no one stopped him. His arms wrapped around my waist, his face buried against my coat. "Merry Christmas, Grandma," he said. Every sound in the room softened. I knelt to meet his eyes. "Merry Christmas, my love." He smiled through the tears still drying on his cheeks. Behind him, Ms. Turner nodded politely, her eyes shining. "He's been counting down the days," she said. "So have I." Richard's fourth and fifth calls came within seconds of each other. The screen flashed, but I did not reach for it. I was watching Gabriel place a small, hand-drawn ornament on the tree, one that looked suspiciously like the torn drawing from months ago. Except this one was whole. The paper had been taped neatly. The family stood together again. I glanced toward the golden light filling the hall. Arthur's portrait reflected its glow. It felt as if he was watching the evening unfold exactly as he had planned. Dinner began just after sunset. The guests gathered around the long table, candles flickering between dishes of roasted vegetables, glazed ham and apple pie. Laughter wove through the air. Stories of Arthur's kindness returned one by one like forgotten gifts. I sat at the head of the table, my seat no longer empty, my silence no longer weak. The sixth call came as dessert was served. I turned the phone face down. Let him wait. Some truths require distance to be seen. When the guests began singing carols, the hall shimmered with warmth. No pretense, no hierarchy, only music, food, and memory. I stepped away for a moment out to the terrace. The sea below mirrored the gold from the hall. The air carried voices and light together, mingling like a promise fulfilled. The phone buzzed once more. The seventh call. I watched it flash, then fade. "Mom," the screen read. Then the message appeared seconds later. "Mom, please call me back." I looked toward the ocean. Waves rolled against the shore, steady and sure. The night had reached its peak of stillness. Arthur once told me that silence always comes before revelation. I slipped the phone back into my coat pocket and whispered toward the horizon. Then let it reveal itself. Dawn arrived quiet and silver. The ocean mist hung low, curling around the hedges of the estate like a living breath. Inside the hall, the golden light still shimmered from the night before. Guests slept in the east wing. The world was still. I stood at the kitchen counter pouring the first cup of coffee when the gate alarm blinked on the monitor. A black sedan had stopped at the front entrance. For a moment I thought it might be the florist returning to collect decorations. Then the car doors opened and I saw them. Richard, Carla. They looked smaller than I remembered. Richard's coat was thrown over his shoulders like a shield. Black mascara streaked down her cheeks. They stood before the iron gates that had once welcomed them without question. Now they stayed shut. The security camera captured everything. Richard pressed the intercom, his voice breaking through the speaker. "Mom, please, let us in. We need to talk." I did not move. I placed my hand on the edge of the counter, feeling the pulse under my skin. The monitor showed Carla gripping the bars, her knuckles white. "Margaret, please," she cried. "It's Christmas. We just want to see you." Behind them, the sea wind carried faint echoes of last night's laughter. It made their silence heavier. For years, they had controlled who entered their version of family. Now the gate itself returned the lesson. Richard pressed the button again. "Mom, I made a mistake." He stopped. His voice cracked. Carla covered her mouth. Her designer coat fluttered in the wind like a tattered flag. I turned the volume down slightly. The sound of their pleading softened, replaced by the hum of the heater inside the hall. For a moment, I saw the reflection of my hands trembling in the polished counter. They were the hands of a mother, not a victor. But then I remembered every December I had spent alone, every invitation that never came, every whispered remark about being embarrassing or old-fashioned, every time I was told gently but firmly that love had an expiration date. I looked back at the screen. Richard was kneeling now, his breath forming clouds in the cold morning air. Carla reached out, pressing her palms against the gate, whispering prayers to a mother-in-law she once mocked. It was almost biblical, the gate between repentance and consequence. I whispered quietly to myself, "Now you know." The sun rose higher, turning the mist gold. The estate's camera captured the scene in full clarity. To them, I was invisible. But I was there, standing inside, watching from the security room like the ghost of every moment they erased me from their lives. My breath trembled, but my resolve did not. I let the seconds stretch. 5 minutes passed, then 7. Time slowed until every sound felt amplified: the wind, the gulls, the metallic tap of Carla's ring against the bars. They had taught me what exclusion felt like. Now the lesson returned quiet and precise. I moved closer to the intercom and pressed the button. My voice came through the speaker low and steady. "Richard." He looked up sharply, eyes red. "Mom, please, we came as soon as we saw—" "I know," I said. He froze the wind, pushing his hair back from his face. "Do you remember," I continued, "how it felt when I knocked on your door last year and you didn't answer?" Richard blinked. His lips parted, but no sound came. Carla's sob turned into a soft, broken sound, part regret, part disbelief. "You told me it was a private dinner," I said, "that there wasn't enough space, that I'd make the guests uncomfortable." Carla whispered, "Margaret, we didn't mean—" "You meant it," I interrupted. The quiet after that was sharp enough to cut. I took a slow breath. The gate camera focused on their faces, guilt painted across them like frost. "You made me stand outside my own family," I said. "Now you know how it feels to be left outside." Carla sobbed harder. Richard looked at her, then back at the camera, searching for words. "Mom, please," he said. "We were wrong. We did not know." About the trust, about the estate, about anything. I let him speak. He wanted forgiveness for humiliation, not for cruelty, and I had learned that true remorse blooms only in silence. Another minute passed. Carla sank to her knees beside him, her tears streaking her cheeks. The mist curled around them, half hiding their faces from the camera, half revealing the humanity they had buried under arrogance. Finally, I reached toward the control panel. My finger hovered over the button that would unlock the gate. Inside, my heart beat steady, not from anger, but from release. When the gate clicked open, the metal shifted with a soft groan. They both froze. The sound echoed through the driveway like the turning of a clock. I pressed the intercom again, my voice firm now. "You may come in," I said. They looked up, confused, hopeful. But I added one more sentence, clear and deliberate. "Now you know how it feels to be left outside." Richard's shoulders dropped. He nodded slowly, eyes glistening. Carla wiped her tears with the back of her hand. As they stepped through the gate, I turned off the monitor. The house behind me was quiet, filled with the lingering scent of last night's candles. The golden light had dimmed slightly, replaced by the soft gray of dawn. Justice, I realized, doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers through locked doors. I walked back into the main hall, my reflection following me in the polished floor. Every step felt like reclaiming ground I had once lost. By the time I reached the grand staircase, I no longer trembled. Whatever waited beyond that door, I was ready for it. The past had knocked, and I had finally decided when to answer. The air in the grand hall felt heavier than before. The golden light from the chandelier softened against the marble floor, almost respectful in its quiet glow. I stood near the fireplace, the warmth steady against the cold that still lingered from outside. Richard and Carla entered slowly. They did not speak. Their footsteps echoed across the hall, a hollow rhythm of guilt. At the center of the room stood Mr. Hale Arthur's attorney, a man I had known since my husband's first company deal. He was tall, measured, and dressed in a dark gray suit that carried the gravity of truth. Beside him lay a leather briefcase. Its lock clicked open with the calm precision of inevitability. "Mrs. Hayes," he greeted, his voice respectful. "Mr. and Mrs. Whitman," he added, turning toward Richard and Carla. They barely nodded. Mr. Hale removed a thick envelope sealed in red wax. "This," he said, "is the reading of the final clause of Mr. Arthur Hayes's living trust." The room fell silent except for the faint crackle of the fire. Even the sea wind outside seemed to pause. Richard's voice broke the stillness. "Now you're reading it now." Mr. Hale adjusted his glasses. "Yes, Mr. Whitman. Per your father's instructions, this clause was to be read only once. Mrs. Hayes returned to the estate and the rightful family gathering was restored." Richard looked at me, confusion clouding his face. "What is this supposed to mean?" I met his gaze, calm and unwavering. "It means your father trusted time more than temper." Mr. Hale unfolded the document carefully. The parchment rustled, a sound that carried memory. He cleared his throat and began to read aloud. To my beloved wife Margaret, the estate at Windermere shall remain under her full control, both as guardian and as moral steward of our family's name. To my son Richard, should he prove himself to be a man of honor, gratitude, and humility, he shall inherit the remaining assets upon my wife's passing. However, Mr. Hale paused. Richard's jaw tightened. Carla gripped his arm, whispering something I could not hear. Mr. Hale continued, "A son who dishonors his mother will inherit nothing. Her dignity is the measure of his worth." The last sentence hung in the air like a verdict. The room seemed to shrink around it. Even the light dimmed, as though Arthur's voice had filled every corner. Richard took a small step back. What does that mean?" Mr. Hale did not answer. He simply set the document on the table beside Arthur's fountain pen, the same one he had used to sign every company contract. Carla's face drained of color. She clutched her chest, her breathing shallow. When she tried to speak, her voice broke into a whisper. "Are you saying we get nothing?" Mr. Hale's expression did not change. "I am saying that Mr. Hayes's intentions were explicit. The estate, the assets, and all related trusts fall under Mrs. Hayes's sole discretion. Permanently." Carla's knees gave out and she nearly collapsed. Richard caught her, his hands trembling. His face, once so confident, was pale with disbelief. He turned to me, the defiance gone, replaced by something smaller. "Mom, he didn't mean this. Dad wouldn't." "He meant every word," I cut in. My tone was soft but cold. "Your father knew the man you could become. He also saw the man you chose to be." Richard's eyes filled with tears. He shook his head, desperate. "I didn't know you'd be here. I didn't know the house was yours." I walked closer, slow and deliberate. "This house was never about ownership, Richard. It was about legacy. And legacy isn't measured in property. It's measured in respect." Mr. Hale closed his folder and stepped back. His duty was complete. He bowed slightly toward me before leaving the room, the sound of his shoes fading down the hall. When the door closed behind him, silence returned, deep and echoing. Carla wiped her face, her mascara smudged like ash. She stared at the trust papers on the table as if they were a weapon aimed directly at her reflection. Her voice came out thin and shaking. "We worked so hard to be perfect. We just wanted to make him proud." I looked at her, the anger long gone. "Perfection is performance, my dear. Character is practice." Richard dropped into one of the armchairs, his elbows on his knees, his hands covering his face. The sound that escaped him was not a sob, but something older, heavier. The sound of a man realizing too late that power built on pride collapses inward. I let the silence breathe between us. It did what no lecture could. Arthur's portrait hung above the mantel, his eyes calm, almost knowing. I could almost hear his voice again, steady, certain, forgiving. He had always believed that truth didn't need defenders, only witnesses. And now he was speaking from the grave, his words cutting through years of distance. Carla reached out toward me, voice trembling. "Margaret, please. We didn't mean to." I raised my hand gently, not to silence her, but to stop the cycle of excuses. "Intent doesn't heal what arrogance destroys," I said. Richard lifted his head, eyes red. He stared at the floor. I wanted to build something that would make him proud, but I lost everything that mattered. His words cracked like old glass. "You didn't lose it," I said quietly. "You gave it away." He looked up, tears cutting down his cheeks. "Can I ever make it right?" I held his gaze for a long time before answering. "That depends on whether you want redemption or restoration. One is about guilt. The other is about growth." The fire flickered, sending shadows across the trust papers. They glowed faintly under the golden light as if Arthur himself had signed them only moments ago. I turned toward his portrait and whispered the truth meant for all of us. Character is revealed in the smallest doors. Carla looked confused. Richard frowned slightly. I walked closer to the table and placed my hand on the document. "The door you closed on me, Richard, that was the smallest one. And yet it revealed everything." No one spoke after that. The ocean wind moved faintly through the chimney, carrying a sound almost like Arthur's laughter, distant kind final. For the first time in years, I felt peace in that house. Not triumph, not revenge. Just the quiet certainty that justice had completed its circle. I reached for the old clock on the mantel and wound it once, listening as it began to tick again. The sound filled the room, rhythmic and sure, the heartbeat of a legacy restored. When I turned back, Richard was still sitting motionless. Carla's head rested against his shoulder, tears falling silently. They looked lost, but also, finally, human. I walked toward the door, pausing beneath Arthur's portrait. "You can stay for breakfast," I said softly, "but you'll never sit at the head of this table until you learn why your father built it." Then I left them there, two broken souls standing in the home they thought they owned, now hearing the only voice that mattered echo through its walls, Arthur's. The morning light poured through the tall windows, soft and forgiving. The storm inside the house had quieted, but the air still carried the weight of everything said and everything that could never be unsaid. I stood by the breakfast table, pouring tea into delicate porcelain cups Arthur and I once saved for Christmas mornings. The sound of the liquid meeting china was the only sound in the room. Behind me, Richard and Carla sat on the edge of their chairs, hands folded, voices swallowed by shame. Then a small voice broke the silence. "Grandma!" Gabriel ran across the room, his shoes squeaking against the marble. He threw his arms around my waist, his cheek pressed against my apron. "Grandma, take me home," he said, the words trembling between hope and sadness. For a moment I couldn't breathe. His innocence pierced through all the adult noise of pride, guilt, and inheritance. I rested my hand on his hair, soft and warm beneath my palm. "This is home, sweetheart," I whispered. "You're safe now." Richard's eyes lifted at those words. He looked at his son, then at me. The distance that pride had built over years collapsed in a single heartbeat. Something inside him, something I thought long gone, broke. He covered his face with both hands and began to sob. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic. It was the sound of a man stripped of every excuse. Carla turned toward him, her mascara still smudged from the night before. "Richard," she said softly, touching his arm. He shook his head. "No, Carla, this is my fault." He stood, his voice unsteady but honest. "Mom, I failed you. I thought love was something I could schedule, something that needed the right setting, the right guests, the right impression." He wiped his face roughly. "I traded respect for approval, and I see now approval never loved me back." I looked at him quietly. Every part of me wanted to rush forward and hold him. But love, if it is to mean anything, must have boundaries. It must protect dignity, not just soothe guilt, Richard. I said gently, "Forgiveness isn't a magic trick. It's work." He nodded, unable to look at me. "I'll do anything," he whispered. Carla rose from her seat, her hands trembling. "Mrs. Hayes," she said, her voice almost breaking, "I don't want your forgiveness for money. I want it because I finally see what I taught my son. I taught him that status mattered more than kindness, that appearances could replace sincerity." Her lips trembled. "I see now how wrong I was. I see it in my child's eyes." I studied her face, the face that once held only calculation. Now it carried something new, truth. Tears, not diamonds, made her human again. I motioned for both of them to sit. The morning sun spilled across the table, catching the steam rising from the tea. It felt almost holy in its stillness. "Listen carefully," I said, my tone calm but firm. "Forgiveness does not erase the past. It acknowledges it so we never repeat it." Richard nodded, tears sliding silently down his cheeks. Carla reached for his hand. Their fingers met not perfectly, but sincerely. I continued, my voice steady. "Love is not a ticket out of responsibility. It's not proof that we've forgotten. It's the chance to act differently next time." Carla looked down at the table, ashamed but listening. Richard took a deep breath. "I want to earn back what I broke," he said. "I don't expect you to trust me right away, but please let me try." His voice cracked again, softer this time. "I'll show up. I'll visit. I'll listen. I'll teach Gabriel better." I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. His skin was cold, trembling, but real. "That I said is where healing starts, in small promises kept." Carla wiped her tears, whispering, "Thank you, Margaret." Her gratitude didn't sound rehearsed. It sounded like surrender, the kind that births humility. I stood slowly, the chair legs brushing against the marble. "Stand up," I told them. They both rose. I looked from one to the other, mother and daughter-in-law, not enemies anymore, but participants in the same reckoning. "I forgive you," I said quietly. The room went still. Carla covered her mouth. Richard's shoulders fell forward as if the words themselves had weight. "But forgiveness." I continued, "is not a full return. We will start small." Richard blinked, confused but hopeful. "Small, yes," I said. "Visits not moving in, calls not control, actions not apologies. Respect must be rebuilt brick by brick." He nodded almost reverently. "I'll take small," he said. "It's more than I deserve." Carla whispered, "Thank you." I gave her a faint smile. "Don't thank me yet. Thank me when you've made Gabriel proud to call you both his parents." Her tears flowed freely again. Richard turned toward his son, who was still standing beside me, clutching my hand. He knelt to meet his child's eyes. "Buddy," he said, voice trembling, "I'm sorry. I wasn't kind to Grandma. I forgot what family means." Gabriel tilted his head, studying his father the way children do when truth finally matches words. "It's okay," he said. "You can learn." The simplicity of it broke the last walls left in that room. Richard pulled his son close, hugging him, as if anchoring himself back to something pure. Carla leaned against him, crying silently. I turned toward the window. The morning sun glistened on the sea, the same sea Arthur loved. For a moment I felt him there again, steady, invisible, but guiding. He used to say that family isn't about who sits closest, but who shows up when the table is empty. Now, after years of emptiness, the table was full again, not of perfection, but of possibility. Richard lifted his head. "Mom," he said softly, "can we stay for breakfast?" I smiled gently. "You may, but only if you help set the table." He nodded quickly, moving toward the sideboard to fetch plates. Carla followed, folding napkins with shaky hands. Gabriel hummed a Christmas tune as he carried spoons, his small steps echoing through the hall. As I watched them work together, I realized that redemption doesn't arrive in grand gestures. It lives in the quiet rebuilding of ordinary mornings. The fire crackled softly. The smell of coffee mixed with cinnamon filled the air again. No one spoke for a while. We didn't need to. Boundaries had been set, forgiveness had been given, and dignity, mine Arthur's, and perhaps even theirs, had been restored. 3 months passed quietly, like pages turning in a book already read but not forgotten. The estate no longer felt heavy. It breathed again. The walls that once echoed with pride now carried the rhythm of healing. Every Sunday, Richard arrived early with Gabriel bringing a basket of fresh bread from the local bakery. Carla followed later, her hair tied back, her clothes simple. They no longer entered as heirs, but as family finding their way back home. The lawyers had finished the paperwork. Arthur's trust had been transferred conditionally to Gabriel. Until that day comes, I remain the sole steward of the legacy if his record showed acts of kindness, service, and responsibility. It was the same clause Arthur once mentioned to me over morning coffee. Money builds nothing if the soul is still poor. Richard didn't argue. He signed every document without hesitation. He also began attending family therapy, something I never imagined hearing him say. Once he would have scoffed at the idea of counseling. Now he walked through those sessions with the humility of a man rebuilding his moral architecture brick by brick. Carla, too, changed in ways words could barely capture. She enrolled in community classes about empathy and ethical parenting. She volunteered at a senior home twice a week, serving meals to the elderly, many of whom reminded her of me. One of the nurses told me later that Carla never sought recognition. She only listened to their stories and wiped their hands with quiet care. It wasn't a performance anymore. It was reparation. The house itself began to reflect that change. The laughter that had returned was softer, sincere. Gabriel often played near the garden, chasing butterflies while humming the song he sang that Christmas morning. Sometimes when he saw me watching, he'd grin and wave his small hands in the air, shouting, "Grandma, look how fast I am." Those were the moments that kept my heart alive. But I knew this peace had to mean something larger than forgiveness within these walls. So I began working with Mr. Hale again. Together we established the Hayes Legacy Foundation, a trust designed to help elderly individuals who had been abandoned, manipulated, or financially mistreated by their children. It wasn't born from bitterness. It was born from empathy, sharpened by experience. We began modestly, one office, 4 volunteers, a single hotline. But the calls came fast. Women who had been forced from their homes, men whose retirement funds had been drained by family. Each story carried the same thread: they were made invisible by those they loved most. Every time I spoke to one of them, I felt Arthur's presence near me, reminding me that dignity is not inherited, it is defended. I often ended those calls with the same words: you may have been left outside, but you still belong to yourself. By March, the foundation had expanded. Donations came from unexpected places, old colleagues of Arthur's community members who heard my story, even strangers who had seen the online articles about the Hayes Estate Christmas redemption. I didn't seek the attention, but I understood its purpose. Stories change laws. Empathy changes systems. One afternoon, as the sun slanted gold across the estate, Richard approached me on the balcony. He had a worn notebook in his hand. "I've been keeping notes," he said quietly, "about the meetings, the therapy, the foundation. I want to learn." He hesitated. "I want Gabriel to see that redemption isn't just about saying sorry, it's about showing up." I smiled faintly. "That's the only legacy worth passing down," I said. He nodded, eyes glassy but proud. "I want to help with the foundation," he added. "If you'll have me?" "You'll start as a volunteer," I said. He smiled, almost laughing. "I wouldn't have it any other way." We stood together for a while, looking over the ocean. Carla joined us a few minutes later, bringing lemonade. She didn't interrupt, didn't try to perform. She simply stood near the wind, playing with her hair, her silence speaking apology in the only language that mattered: change. The estate had become more than a symbol of wealth. It had become a classroom for grace. Inside the main hall glowed again with afternoon light. On the mantel, Arthur's portrait looked warmer now, as if the man himself approved of what had unfolded. Beneath it rested the framed mission statement of the foundation: "Character outlives fortune." Sometimes I walked those halls late at night, barefoot, remembering how close I had come to losing everything: home, respect, even hope. And each time I passed the study, I paused by the safe where it all began. The key still rested in my coat pocket, smooth and cold against my palm. Arthur's handwriting still lingered in my mind. This home will reveal the truth. He was right. It revealed far more than wealth. It revealed who we truly were when love stopped being easy. Now, 3 months later, the truth was no longer bitter. It was balanced. Justice had done its quiet work, and compassion had completed the rest. As evening settled, I stepped out onto the balcony. The ocean stretched before me, calm and endless. The estate lights flickered on, one by one, below, casting soft gold across the courtyard. I held the key between my fingers. Its metal glowed under the fading sun. Some doors, I thought, are meant to close so better ones can open. Behind me, Gabriel's laughter echoed from the hall. Richard's deeper voice followed, warm and steady. For the first time in years, I didn't brace myself at the sound. I let it fill the air. It was no longer the noise of performance, it was music of belonging. I took a deep breath, the salt of the ocean filling my lungs. The horizon burned with orange and pink. It looked like forgiveness wearing light. Arthur used to say that life is a series of rooms. Some we build, some we inherit, some we must rebuild with our own hands. Standing there, I finally understood. The room we built now was not of marble or money, but of character. I turned the key once in my hand before setting it gently on the railing. The light caught it flashing like a final blessing. A door closed on me once I whispered, but another door, the right door, opened the world. Thank you for staying with me until the final moment of this story. If it touched something in your heart, you are not alone. Many people carry quiet battles inside their families. Many have stood outside closed doors and wondered if dignity still matters. But today's story reminds us of one truth. Character can fall, but it can also rise again. Healing takes time, but hope grows the moment we choose better. If you believe in dignity, quiet strength, and the courage to start over, make sure you subscribe and join this community of listeners. New stories of resilience and justice arrive every week. Tell me in the comments where you are listening from. Your voice helps others feel less alone. Check the pinned comment for a question of the day and share your thoughts. Use the hashtags below to join the discussion. Thank you for being here. Take care of your heart today.